What were we going to talk about?
Well, we're going to talk about New York under a state of emergency now, and
Mm-hmm.
what exactly that entails. I was trying to figure out when I looked at the actual proclamation
Mm-hmm.
and the actual executive order that was signed by the governor. I didn't really see language about like school closures or business closures or anything like that. In fact, I saw basically what I saw was if you need to go shopping, you can still go shopping. Uh, so I'm not exactly sure what the state of emergency entails. Usually, when you have a state of emergency that is, called by the governor, it usually means that your life is disrupted and your freedom of movement is
Right.
disrupted.
Right.
And I'm not really seeing that in the language in the executive order. Now, I'm sure there's, another place I can go to see it, but in the couple of minutes that I looked, I didn't really see it. So I don't know really what to expect with this state of emergency and what that means for the rest of the country.
Right. Well, okay. What usually happens, because that's the other thing too. It's like there wasn't really much information out there, was there?
Not
About what it
really.
means, what
Not
it
really.
entails.
No, not really.
And you didn't see much on Twitter or anything. I mean, it just happened like last
It
night.
happened yesterday. So,
And they always what?
oh, nothing.
They always do this kind of shit like this. They always seem to do it like on, because it happened on a Friday, right? On a Friday.
Right.
After a holiday, so usually most people are off; they're not working,
Right.
And so they did this in an underhanded way.
Right. It's like being fired. They always fire you on a Friday.
Well, and then like when they want to like pass legislation that's like underhanded and sneaky and kind of like will fuck over the American public, so that nobody has a chance to question it or protest about it or anything like that, they will do it late on a Friday during a holiday season. I think Obama did that a couple times.
Yeah, of course, right?
And so I'm giving our ASMR some sound in the background.
Yeah, it feels really underhanded. I'm not exactly sure why there's a state of emergency. There's no evidence of any. There's never really been an evidence of anything. For the last 2 years, this is all just hyped up marketing and authoritarian language coming out of your governments. And speaking sort of existentially and broadly, I think the only thing that I've come away from this so far, now that we're nearing the end of the year, is that the United States is very much into Stockholm Syndrome.
You want to expand on that?
I was thinking about doing a blog piece on this, and something really comprehensive, sort of the end of the year and end of the 2-year reign of terror that seems to be continuing. Is my only takeaway from all of this is that it's business as usual, and it's business as usual on top of, American citizens that don't seem to understand what words mean. I don't understand why people gave it any credibility at all.
Well, you said something kind of sarcastic this morning on, what was it, on Twitter?
Probably.
Something about you were expecting Americans to
ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you do. You ignore shit that doesn't make any sense. You ignore the crazy person in the room. You ignore the national emergency that was declared on March 13th of 2020.
Well, okay, so what you were saying was you were expecting, you figured that New Yorkers would just ignore this
emergency declaration
order
by the governor yesterday.
Right.
They'll just ignore. They have to just ignore it.
But then you went on to say, but just like Americans did in March of 2020.
Right. I honestly, like at this point, after all this time, I'm truly baffled and completely flummoxed by all of it, like the entirety of it. Sure, there's social impact investing going on, and there's all sorts of, cruel corporate takeovers going on behind the scenes. But I don't think that your average American sees evidence of that.
Right.
And yet there's a lot of hysteria going on around things that not a lot of people really understand the concept of, which means that a lot of people don't understand the concept of slavery, which means that a lot of people don't understand the concept of oppression, which means that when people are being oppressed and being enslaved and being, you know, put in these really terrible positions, they're not familiar with it, which means that these things are normal, which means that it begins from childhood when your abuse heaped on by your family is so normalized, and we all have this weird Pavlovian response to life in general, where being abused and being suppressed and being targeted is so normalized that when society, screams at you to muzzle yourself and get a shot, you're like, okay, okay, that's cool because that's normal. It's become so normalized. I don't see any evidence of people putting up the least bit of resistance in the United States, not like we're told is happening in other countries, which I'm not sure I even believe that. I'm not sure what to believe anymore,
Well, I know.
you know?
Well, so much gets hidden from us that they don't want us to see, and so much gets put in front of us that they want us to see, right?
Right.
And some of that is that's a lot of that is absolute fuckery. But I think if you back up a little bit, we started seeing these mandates and laws coming into effect, especially in California and New York, those two states, regarding vaccination of children, where it was like law that children had to have X number of vaccines or had to be vaccinated in some capacity in order to attend school. That was happening in California before we moved away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was like, at that time, I didn't consider myself quote unquote anti vaxxer, but see, that's their word, right?
Right.
But I was absolutely opposed to that idea because you're making people do something that they may not want to do. And I didn't necessarily believe that doing this helped anybody,
Right.
you know? Um, but it was those actions were those precursor sort of
Mm-hmm.
situations that got people to start thinking differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is what we mean when we talk about nudging.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a very heavy-handed way of nudging people, but it gets people into thinking, oh right, so we need to have these things. We need to have this stuff in place, because who knows what might happen if we don't.
Right.
Those anti-vaxxers, they blah blah blah, right? So it's a way of shifting opinion in the public and allowing people to open up to new ideas that they might not have accepted before. So you go back and you see that, oops, in this situation, and um, and so what I'm trying to say is we're confused now about what's going on, like with New York, or like people accepting all this bullshit, and yet this stuff has been going on for a long time. You know, it's been happening for a much longer period of time to nudge us into the next phase, and we're already starting to experience those nudges for the next phase, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a constant thing. It goes on continually. Um, this morning we were listening to yesterday's UK column, and they were talking about the so-called South African variant. Um,
Omicron or
oh,
something.
yeah, yeah. Oh
Mm-hmm.
my God. Uh,
Omicron. It's
I know,
moronic.
I know, moronic, but it's also oh my God virus.
Mm-hmm.
It's the oh my God virus
Mm-hmm.
variant. Oh my God virus variant, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they're using like really hyped up crazy ass language like it's a super
Super spreader.
no it was
Super variant.
yeah, what was the word they were using? It was like God, what was it? Something
Well,
like that, a super virus or a super, something.
right. I, but honestly, like, I really feel
Super mutant.
super mutant. So I feel that we've gone from, look, I can't even like get a hold of my words. On March 13th of 2020, when the national emergency was declared, my very first thought was nobody in the world with a speck of intelligence and a speck of rational thought and even a half of a speck of critical thinking is going to take this seriously. Stores will not close, businesses will not close, nobody will ever do anything differently in their life. This is a big joke. No one's going to take this seriously. And I was shocked, and am still shocked to this day, that we've allowed all of this mayhem and all of this chaos over absolutely nothing, when all we had to do was just keep living our life as if it didn't exist. Keep going on, and keep, creating ways that we could survive in this world like we've always done. This and now we're at a point where that's not possible. That's not possible. You can't go back. Families are falling apart. 40% of the economy has been taken away from us, in the form of small business infrastructure. People are dying. People are getting murdered openly. People are sticking their arms out for, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different boosters. People are assimilating, and I'm just watching all of this chaos swirl around me, including researchers and podcasters who have become like the worst versions of narcissists that I've seen. Yeah. I'm just like in shock over this. I don't know what it means for a rational, logical human being to exist in this world anymore. I don't know what to do. Like, I'm shocked. I mean, the fact that anybody gave any credibility to the New York governor's state of emergency announcement yesterday.
Well, okay, let's go back to that.
It's really kind of silly.
Let's go back to that, because I'm still trying to figure out what it entails. I mean, we haven't seen much.
Well, that's just it. I read the executive order that she signed. Mm-hmm. It's on Twitter, and they uploaded it and they put it on Twitter.
Can you? I mean, is it long? Is it?
No, it's like a page and a half. Yeah, let me find it. New York emergency.
Because as we stated a few minutes ago, this took place on a day that is a day that most people are off from work. Most people, not everyone, but most people, including the government, government agencies. You don't get a lot done on Thanksgiving weekend, right? Just because. So they chose a Friday after a national holiday, before the weekend, late in the day, to announce this. So what does that tell you? That tells you that they want to shove something down the throats of the New York public, mm-hmm. Make them do something that they would normally not put up with.
Right.
But at the same time, they're counting on people acquiescing. And you brought it up, so let me...
So, it's an executive order, and a lot of it's just, this really whereas the blah, blah, blah language, but I suppose I could read it. Whereas the COVID-19 global pandemic has been declared a public health emergency, international concern by the World Health Organization since early 2020, whereas the United States Health and Human Services Secretary declared a public emergency for the United States to aid the nation's healthcare community in responding to COVID-19 on January 31st, 2020, whereas New York is now experiencing COVID-19 transmission at rates the state has not seen since April 2020, whereas the rate of new COVID-19 hospital admissions has been increasing over the past month to over 300 new admissions a day, false, whereas the state must pursue a coordinated approach to ensure hospital capacity statewide is able to meet regional needs, whereas the state government must support the municipalities and counties in their efforts to facilitate and administer vaccinations.
So this is all the buildup. This is all the reasons for
Right.
this. Okay.
So to administer efforts to facilitate and and administer vaccinations and tests for COVID-19 and to prevent the virus from continuing to spread at such rate. Now, therefore, I, Kathy Hochul, Governor of the State of New York, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Constitution and the laws of the State of New York, hereby find pursuant to Section 28, Article 2B of the Executive Law, that a disaster has occurred in New York State for which the affected local governments are unable to respond adequately, and I do hereby declare a state disaster emergency for the state of New York through January 15th, 2022. In addition, this declaration satisfies the requirements of Part 360 of the New York State Codes, Rules, and Regulations to allow the state to utilize the surge and flex system, which may include, but is not limited to, postponement of non-essential elective procedures. Okay, so there it is. Further, pursuant to Section 29, Article 2B of the Executive Law, I direct the implementation of the State Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan and authorize all necessary state agencies to take appropriate action to assist local governments and individuals in containing, preparing for, responding to, and recovering from this state disaster emergency, to protect state and local property, and to provide such other assistance as is necessary to protect public health, welfare, and safety. In addition, by virtue of the authority vested in me by Section 29 of Article 2B of the Executive Law, to temporarily suspend or modify any statute, local law, ordinance, order, rule, or regulation, or parts thereof of any agency during a state disaster emergency, if compliant with such statute, local law, ordinance, order, rule, or regulation, would prevent, hinder, or delay action necessary to cope with the disaster emergency, or if necessary to assist or aid in coping with such disaster, I hereby temporarily suspend or modify for this period from the date of this executive order through December 26, 2021, the following. Section 112 of the state finance law to the extent necessary to add additional work, sites, funding, and time to state contracts or to award contracts, including but not limited to contracts or leases for relocation and support of state operations under Section 3 of the Public Buildings Law, or contracts under Section 9 of the Public Buildings Law, or contracts for professional services under Section 136A of the State Finance Law, or contracts for purchases of commodities, services, and technology through any federal GSA schedules, Federal 1122 programs, or other state, regional, local, multi-jurisdictional, or cooperative contract vehicles. Section 163 of the State Finance Law and Article 4C of the Economic Development Law to the extent necessary to allow the purchase of necessary commodities, services, technology, and materials without following the standard notice and procurement processes, Section 97G of the State Finance Law, to the extent necessary to purchase food, supplies, services, and equipment, or furnish or provide various centralized services to assist affected local governments, individuals, and other non-state entities in responding to and in recovering from the disaster emergency given under my hand and the privy seal of the state in the city of Albany this 26th day of November in the year 2021. Kathy Hochul.
Okay.
Secretary
So
by the governor. Right.
a few things going on here. The obvious one is about the procurement and money, contracting, procurement, and basically she's shutting down all new building contracts or agreements or anything that's going on.
Right.
Okay. She's also shutting down any sort of, I guess, cooperative contracting with the the GSA, which is the Government Services Administration.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically the administration that takes care of all like federal employees.
Right.
Um, and there was another thing in there too, but so basically, it sounds to me like
She's suspending all rules and laws and local
thank you, right,
ordinances.
yeah,
That's the thing that's chilling is the
that's
suspension
right.
of civil liberties and civil rights.
You might as well declare martial law at that point.
Right, and that's what the state of emergency is. It's cover for martial law. It's kind of like a soft martial law.
Yeah,
I can't, and this is why I'm so baffled and shocked by the attitude of the American people. Like, how many times over the last 2 years have I seen Americans walking around with a mask on their face, and the mask is um, the American flag,
right,
or it
right,
says freedom across the
or something
mask.
like that. Yeah,
It's like, I don't think people understand what words mean anymore.
yeah, they don't understand concepts. So then the other thing that I wanted to point out is remember a few days ago, I think it was, or maybe last week, something to do with the mayor, de Blasio, requesting something from the governor about
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
the transportation system.
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly.
so
I was just gonna go there.
my first quip about that was, oh well, that's why does he have to ask the governor? That should be under the city's domain. Well, we got a tweet back from Helen of Destroy, who explained to us because she lives there. She said, "Oh no, it's under state rule, which is backward and bullshit." But he has to go through the state in order to do anything with the transportation authority. So this, I believe, ties into that.
Okay, I do too. That's the first thing I thought of when I
Mhm.
discovered that the governor of New York had declared a new state of emergency, and it looks like it's going to, it's one of those 90-day things, right?
Right.
Which they all are, but then they keep
Upping or whatever.
re-upping them.
Yeah.
They keep
Renewing it.
renewing them. So it was last week sometime that out of nowhere, Bill de Blasio tweets that he is requesting that vaccine passports be required on all public transportation in New York City. And so JP and I, being San Franciscans, we thought that was odd because in San Francisco, the San Francisco MTA, or the municipal
Mm-hmm.
body, is run by the city. So all of these, anything that happens to Muni, whether it's a bus, a cable car, a trolley, or a train, or a streetcar, it goes through a city vote,
Right.
and it's the board that runs the MTA that votes on these, any initiatives or any policies or anything that at all that would affect Muni. Well, apparently in New York, it's a state thing, and so that's why I can almost guarantee that that's why the state of emergency is put in place. They want people to chill for 90 days while they implement a passport system for the MTA in New York, meaning that if you are people like me and JP, where you rely on public transportation solely, that is your sole means of transportation. We don't, we have bikes, but we can't ride our bikes. There's not any infrastructure to ride our bike to go do the things that we need to do or want to do. So we rely on the bus.
Especially in the wintertime.
Yeah.
I can't get downtown on my bike during snow,
Right.
when there's snow, because they don't clear the path that a bike would take.
Right. So we rely 100% on public transportation. So if something like this were to be implemented in Pittsburgh, where we live, we would be basically sending out a GoFundMe campaign to buy a car.
Right.
Because we can't. We would literally be trapped in our own home. Like I suppose we could do Ubers and Lyfts, and the one taxi service that services this area, but we can't ever get any. It's hit or miss with Uber, Lyft, and the taxi service. It's really hit or miss.
Right.
Like getting these people to come pick us up. So we would literally be stranded.
So
So this thing that's happening in New York right now
mhm.
is pretty scary, because the idea that you would need to show a vaccine passport in order to get on a bus or ride a train or take the L or take the subway or whatever is well, that's how you know that we're in Nazism. That's
Right.
how you know that in like we're in the throes
Because
of
they're
fascism.
they're throwing up rules,
Hmm.
mandates, as opposed to passing laws,
Right.
right? And the other thing that's going on is they're using mandates and rules to curtail any lawmaking ability, right? So they have taken away the ability for new laws to go in or to do any sort of legislation
Hmm.
to block something like this
Right.
before it happens.
Exactly. Exactly. So they're making sure that there's no legal way through your rights and protections and through your state's constitution or even your city's ordinance. There's no legal way to stop the rollout of the vaccine passport, vaccine requirement for riding public transportation. I really feel that this is what this state of emergency is in New York. And I am baffled and I am shocked and I am just completely like on my head about like why are New Yorkers just like, okay. You know, I also feel that there's a little bit of a smackdown going on. New York City has been the one city that has actually come out and protested, you know, vaccine passports and the segregation of society, and have, you know, demanded that leadership take a look at the actual, you know, science behind all of this garbage. New York has been the one city um, to come out and actually do something and say something about this and push back. And last week they had another big rally and another big, you know, meeting. And, you know, Naomi Wolf spoke, and she's kind of a heavy hitter, you know, and it's like, I have a feeling that the state of emergency is in response to that. It's like, oh yeah, you're going to fight this, and so it's an even harder smackdown, which makes me, you know, I understand why people don't want to come out and rally and don't want to come out and fight these, you know, terrible, you know, emergency authorizations, which allow for the implementation of violations of rights and also create a segregated society. I can understand why people are, you know, hesitant to come out because they're afraid of what the response will be from your local government if you do that. But I'm so tired of people being ruled by fear, you know. So I'm really just like in shock. Like I don't know what to say.
Um,
I can't believe that people are allowing this to happen. You know.
well, I think that, you know, again, this was done in such a shitty way that it hasn't given anybody a chance to. I mean, look at us. We're grappling with it,
Right.
and we're pretty astute with what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So they did this in such a way to where it's going to take a while for the opposition to get any sort of momentum or any sort of um, mass um, messaging, right? So this was all done in the background. So now the opposition, if there is any, it will take them time to muster, you know, consensus and groups and to, you know, basically respond with any sort of, you know, real um, well, response.
Right.
You know, and so it's not that people don't care, they don't want to worry, they don't they're afraid, they don't want to do anything. It's just that this was done, you know, in a typically political and, like you said, you know,
Mm-hmm.
Nazist way
Mm-hmm.
of dealing with it, you know, and making it look like there is an actual emergency and using, you know, abusing the laws that are in place for somebody in power
Right.
to instate these kinds of um, you know, what emergency orders, right?
Right. And you
It's
know,
abuse of power. It
when
really is.
when uh when Cuomo was released from his duties and Kathy Hochul replaced him, you know, I was like, be careful what you ask for.
Right.
You know, had Cuomo stayed, would New York be facing
Yes.
the possible segregation of society even worse by not allowing people to take public transportation who don't have a vaccine?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
You're right.
He's a fucking, he's the mafia. So yeah, he wouldn't have any problems with that at all.
Yeah, that's true. But I guess my feeling is that maybe with Cuomo in place, people would have come out faster. They would have come out quicker. They would have gotten ahead of this. But people were ameliorated with the idea that Cuomo was gone, so they were
They
happy
relaxed a
and
little
they
bit.
relaxed a little, and they shouldn't ever relax.
The
You
Democratic
can't
No,
relax.
because the Democratic Party are the Nazi Party, and they they used identity politics to satiate any sort of um, Democrat liberal angst about Cuomo or anything like that. Although he had a lot of support, so it was weird that he stepped down. Politically speaking, it was weird that he stepped down when he did. But they made up this whole thing about him harassing women, right? So
Yeah,
so they trump this, or not Trump. They trot this out in order to get people to go against him. Then they replace him with a woman. So it was like a whole power play
sure.
designed. Well, it was designed to look like a power play, even though it was all, like he was probably on board with it, right?
Yeah,
Because
I mean,
he's being set up and groomed for the next phase of his career.
yeah, yeah, he's fine. I I guess my my issue with this is, that nobody paid attention to our advice on March 13th of 2020,
Well,
which is
we had probably like half the audience that we
I
have
don't
now.
care whatever audience it is, it was the right advice. Whether we had one person living or listening to us or 1 million people listening to us, it doesn't matter. The fact is it was the right advice. It was the correct way to handle all of this, which is to ignore it, which is to become that limp noodle and just go about your life, go about your business, do some workarounds, ignore all of it. Ignore it. And that includes, the investments, take the money from your social impact investing, which is, which COVID has given rise to. Take the money and continue to operate like you always do. Check the thing off the box that says, "Oh yeah, sure, we're implementing a vaccine passport segregational policy for the MTA and not allowing people who don't have." Yeah, yeah, sure, 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 and then just operate like you normally do. That's the way of the corporate that
Hmm.
take the money and then
Check off the box.
check off the box and then just do what you want anyway. Like I don't understand why that concept is so difficult to
Well,
I am baffled by all
mhm.
of this. Like you are, it's okay to lie. It's okay to be dishonest.
Right. No, I
You
get.
have been
Yeah.
lied to, and there's nothing but dishonesty
Hmm.
and covert tactics which are affecting people's lives literally for years, long before COVID.
Yeah.
It's okay to lie. It's okay for the municipal board to tell the impact investors, the money that they're getting from these, investors and from these corporations. It's okay to say to them, yeah, sure, we'll go ahead and segregate society on your behalf. No problem. And then just operate like you normally would. Then not only do you make money from your impact investors, but then you still make money from the general public who is taking public transportation. So you're making tons of money hand over fist and all of your board members are happy.
Well,
And I don't understand why they have to like actually go through with
well,
it.
you're acting like these bureaucrat types operate like um, dishonest business people. They operate as dishonest government people,
Yeah,
which is different.
yeah.
And they're always going to be looking out for their backside. But I think this is the kind of thing that has to take place at the lowest level, where the bus driver that we saw in, like, what was that, Germany, who was like letting people on without masks a while ago,
Sure,
and he was
yeah.
like, "Yeah, come on board, come on board, come on board." And I think that that's the level it has to take place. Oh, my machine was broken, um, and I couldn't check, passports. I couldn't check, their status. So yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so that's where it has to come down to. It has to be, civil disobedience,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing.
Which would have been a lot easier. Civil disobedience would have been a lot easier to do. Like you could, if people had just done what they were supposed to do almost 2 years ago now,
Right.
which
But
is to ignore
but see, the
this.
problem is that they sold everybody, even the most like even the so-called left, right? The extreme left, right? The radical left, you know, the so-called anarchists and socialists and communists who just went along with this thing, especially the anarchists. That's the thing that kills me. You've got PM Press out there just like towing the party line. It's because they received, the impact investment.
Uh-huh.
Everybody got money. That's why everybody, didn't support any of this bullshit or supported all this bullshit. And so, um, it's all about money. It's all about money. That's why things have gone along, and then it of course convinced everybody else to do this stuff, to go along with it. And it only requires like 10% of the population, which we've seen, right? That's
Right.
the managerial class. That's the media. That's the liberal toadies out there.
Right.
Okay, all this is repeating what we've been saying, but that's what's going on,
Yeah.
and there's
Well, I think the part that really bothers me is that this executive order that I just read, people are like, okay, well that's New York. No, you don't get it. Like this stuff is going to
this is
catch
a
like
test balloon.
fire.
This is a test balloon for the rest of the country.
Next thing you know, they're going to have another state of emergency in California.
Well, they already have
Then,
the hardware set up on our buses.
hmm right, the hardware set up for the app on your phone to pay for your ride,
Your
for your
bus fare,
transit
yeah.
ride. So for people who are just joining, once again, the state of emergency was declared in New York yesterday, and I just read the executive order verbatim. So when this is over, you can go back and listen. Um, And basically, what it is, it's the suspension of all local municipal orders and laws. That this means that now let's pause for a minute and go back to something that the mayor of New York City mentioned or said that he was going to do last week, which is that he's going to reach out to the state, he's going to reach out to the governor's office and request that vaccine passports be required for all public transportation in New York City. So this is a further segregation of society and a deep, deep, economic warfare on people who need to take public transportation, like me and JP over here. We don't have a car. We can't afford a car. We take the bus everywhere. If they were to implement, you know, this kind of thing where you would need a vaccine passport just to take a bus or just to take the train, we would be screwed. We would not be able to go anywhere or do anything. We would just, like prisoners, we would have to have things delivered to us if we needed something. We wouldn't be able to go to our favorite park and go for a walk because we have to take a bus to get to
Can't go to
that
the
park.
dentist office.
Can't
Do
go to
that.
the dentist office. Can't do anything. So if this is what the state of emergency in New York is really about. It's about the implementation of vaccine passports in the MTA, in the New York MTA. That's what it's really about. And by declaring the state of emergency on November 26th of 2020, what the governor has said in the language of the emergency order is that she's suspending all rules or ordinances that local bodies would have in place to protect from implementations that would violate those rules or ordinances in place. In other words, if the MTA in New York has a system in place that says no 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 no, you're not going to use our service as a way to commit segregation, as a way to bifurcate society. That rule and ordinance that the MTA has in place, probably through some very technical language, is suspended under the emergency order, and the technology can then go ahead and move forward. So, what do you do when technology to segregate society is put in place, which keeps people who are not vaccinated from riding a train or haven't taken a shot because it's not a vaccine, haven't taken the shot for something that they don't need in order to ride a train so that they can get to work and do their job? You take a baseball bat and you smash that motherfucker and you take the goddamn train. Like, that's what it's come to. Like, I don't know, and it didn't have to come to this because all you had to do when the national emergency was declared on March 13th of 2020 was laugh. And I honestly thought that all of those, you know, Nazis, I'm sorry, Democrats that hated Trump would laugh in the face of his national emergency because they've spent the last 5, 6 years of our lives talking about how much they hate Trump. And they were the first to capitulate to the emergency orders under the national
Right.
emergency.
Yeah.
So, because of them and because of all of us capitulating to garbage, we now have to face a further deepening of the segregation of society.
You know what's scary about all
This is
that?
such bullshit.
You know what's scary about all that? The Democrats, the people who supported all this shit, didn't think he was doing enough, fast enough. They wanted him to do more than what was declared. They wanted him to do more, which would have been like, probably martial law.
Yeah, they wanted martial law. They were screaming for martial law. They wanted the segregation.
Syria's open there.
They wanted the segregation of society. Like, for instance, not letting people who needed to take public transportation. They wanted that faster. In fact, in San Francisco, they did it. They did it in San Francisco.
They cut down the bus service down to like less than 20%
Right.
of what it normally would be.
A city that relies almost 100% on public transportation. We're talking about a tiny little hamlet of a city with lots of hills
And lots of people.
and lots of people. About 1 million people occupy a space that's only 49 square miles. So not a lot of people have cars. Even the wealthy don't have cars. Most people ride their bikes or they take public transportation. And there are at least 6 to 8 different types of public transportation you can take in San Francisco. A subway, a streetcar, a trolley car, a cable car, and a bus.
And that's not to say there aren't a lot of cars in San Francisco. There's a lot of cars in San Francisco, but parking is next to impossible most times. And if you wanted to go downtown to work and you're going to drive, parking costs are just, it would basically be, if somebody was
Like a
making
quarter of your paycheck.
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically, yeah.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But so a lot of people take the bus anyway, and they only use their cars to go out of town like a couple of times on the weekend if they want to like cross the bridge and go to Marin County or go down to Southern California or something. That's when you need a car. They don't do it to like, go to work. They either ride their bike because it's literally like a 15-minute bike ride to the beach or a 15-minute bike ride downtown. Why would you ever drive your car to do such?
Well, unless there were a lot of people who lived in the city and worked in the Silicon Valley, and even those who didn't, like, there were those Google buses, right? But a lot of people still drove.
Right. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that San Francisco laid the groundwork for this by going ahead and the MTA, which is its own body, it's not controlled by the state. It's its own body. It's controlled by city officials and city, and board members on the MTA. They went ahead and just slashed their service so that they could probably implement to this day, technology in the few services that they do have left, that would further segregate and bifurcate society. So I feel like San Francisco has probably already done this, but that it's gone under the radar, like no one's talking about it.
Yeah.
But New York is very obvious. Last week we had Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, say, I am going to speak to the states, to the governor and talk about implementing vaccine passports for our public transit riders in New York City. And boom, a week later, we have an emergency, a national or a state emergency declared.
The other thing about state emergencies is, now I don't know if this is the same thing as like disaster relief or anything like that. But usually, when the governor declares something like this, there's also federal money that comes in play
Mm-hmm.
that will help relieve the disaster that's occurred. So I have a feeling that there's also something along those lines associated with this.
Yeah.
I can't be sure, but I'm just speculating that there's
Of
also
course.
and with New York being a Democrat governor and there's a Democrat president, and the whole thing with Biden's infrastructure bill, this kind of fits in with that,
Mm-hmm.
because from what I've heard, they're looking to do a lot of pay out a lot more to Social Security, which is fine, except that um, they are spending down the trust fund associated with Social Security faster
Right.
than it would have spent down before, and they're not doing anything to resupply it. So
No, they're going to privatize everything.
right. So they're looking to they're going, oh hey, big win for those of you on Social Security, and then you get brownie points politically and all this stuff, but the public isn't being told that they're giving out more money. They're not putting any more money into the coffers. So it's going to be something that is basically what they always do. They kick the problem down, down
They
the
kick the
street.
can down the road,
Right.
right?
And it won't show up for another, 8 to 10 years, and the person who is the public official then is going to have to deal with it, and they'll deal with it the way they always deal with it, which is blame the past, whatever.
Right.
So, or blame the people who are the recipients.
So the state of emergency in New York that's taking place right now. I'm not seeing one person on Twitter even talking about it. I'm only seeing a few blue checks and white checks like retweeting, "Oh, this is happening. This is terrible." Okay, anyway,
The end.
I don't see any. I follow like a bunch of New Yorkers on Twitter. I don't see them really talking about it. I don't see anybody really talking about the fact that we're going to have, the working class absolutely affected by the requirement of vaccine passports on public transportation. That this was something that was requested by Bill de Blasio last week. I don't see anybody on Twitter, standing up for the working class as usual. I don't, this is what is so frustrating to me. I guess it's everybody has cars and so nobody cares. Like, I don't get it, you know? I don't get it. If they pass something like this in Pittsburgh, or something like this is implemented in Pittsburgh and we get another emergency here, I know that it's going to be cover to install vaccine passport system in the public transportation um, system. And I just last week got screamed at and threatened by a bus driver who
For
said
not wearing a buff.
for not having my mask up over my, my buff over my face, like I'm some kind of goddamn fucking motherfucking slave. I don't need to wear anything over my face. You don't have the right to pretend to be a doctor to tell me I need to put something over my face. Nobody has the right, even your own doctor doesn't even have the right to tell you to do anything. It's your choice. And I don't want to put a mask over my face, and I don't have to tell you why I don't want to. But I know that this amped up, authoritarian fucking Nazi language coming out of the bus drivers in Pittsburgh is to prepare people. Oh, you don't have your vaccine passport? You can't get on the bus. You can't sit at the fucking lunch counter. This is bullshit, you guys. This segregation stuff is bullshit. Like, we already fixed this problem. And everybody seems to be okay with reinstating it. I literally feel like a goddamn Cassandra over here. We get 5 views. We get nothing. Nobody seems to fucking care. And it's really obvious to me. You put 2 and 2 together. Last week, Bill de Blasio requested segregation, and this week the governor said, "Oh, okay, emergency. We're going to go ahead and declare a state of emergency so that we can implement segregation."
So that, and also set it up so that nobody can fight it within the government.
Right. So that nobody can fight it within your municipal bodies, within the government, or within your agencies that have technical language in place to protect you from this. Why isn't anyone talking about this? Is it too soon? Is it just because everyone's on vacation
Yeah, I think it is. Well,
and it's
that's what I keep coming back to. They did this on the time when they did it on purpose. They did it when they did it
yeah,
because nobody has the capacity to respond to it. Period.
right.
Nobody can put up any protest. Nobody can do anything within the government, and even if they wanted to, now they've been curtailed from doing that because the way that the order is worded. Okay, I think we can wrap this up because I think we've talked about it,
Yeah.
all aspects of
Yeah,
it.
who knows? Maybe somebody who actually has some followers in New York and actually has some influence in New York will say something and stop this train wreck
Yeah.
from moving forward. And I have a feeling by 2022, New Yorkers are gonna be in for a really really awful wake up call when they try to get on a bus or they try to get on a train or a subway or an elevated rail and BL and they can't because they are not vaccinated. And I think that's where we're headed.
Well,
And I always knew from the very beginning that the transportation agencies would be the first to throw the working
sure.
class under the
Well, I mean,
bus.
as it stands, I mean, it's transportation is one of the sectors where they're still requiring masking,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. This is
Whereas,
not,
like,
these are not difficult leaps of
you can
logic.
go into Starbucks without a mask on, but you can't ride the bus without a mask on. You can't fly without a mask on. You can't take an Amtrak without a mask on. You can't take a Greyhound without a mask on. The Greyhound station here in Pittsburgh requires you to put a mask on before you go inside. It requires it,
Yeah.
which is bullshit, right?
Right. Whereas just next door to it is like, say, a coffee shop where you don't have to wear a mask. None of this makes any sense. It's certainly not about a health crisis. This is about the transportation agencies getting tons of funding to implement segregation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to call it, to implement, systems in place to protect people from a virus. I'm not going to call it that. It's segregation. It's segregation and it's, Nazism. And people get paid a lot of money, six figures or more a year, in order to implement the technology to make these things happen. And everybody who takes, public transportation seems to be okay with it. Maybe they're all fucking, maybe they all have the COVID shot, and I'm the only one that doesn't. I don't
Yeah, I
know.
don't think that's the case. I think
So,
that this is going to be something that we'll see play out. Oh, by the way, I was going to bring up before we go, this is also happening during the period of the holiday period, right? So there's going to be, this is going to hurt any sort of commerce. This is going to,
right, this is a further attack on the
um,
small business
right, yeah,
infrastructure.
people who are self-employed. But the other thing is that it's also a time when people are less likely to do any sort of protest,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because people are busy, but also the weather. All this stuff is taking place when it's harder to protest, when it's harder to come out and go against this stuff. They did all this shit in Australia, like all the hardcore shit during the winter down there.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's winter here, and they're starting to implement this crap in New York. So it's a pattern, and it's a deliberate pattern because they're doing it when it's harder for people to go against the authorizations that take place.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's good. That's a good place to end it.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys, for tuning in and letting us do this test run for our audio. We streamed on quite a few platforms at the same time. We're trying to push our technology to the limits here and get it so that we can have a farther reach. We usually do audios once a day. We upload them on our blog so that people who follow our blog can have access to our audios, but we're trying to, you know, go even further. So the next time we do this, we're going to actually go stream to more platforms. And thanks a lot for tuning in today.
Yep. All right.
Bye
Talk to you
bye.
later. Bye. And.